Greetings and welcome to episode 32 of the Sustaining the Herd podcast brought to you by Agri-Services and Engineering of Raymond, Nebraska. I'm your host, Andrew Wadle, and I'm joined in the studio as usual with my co-host, Brock Vitek.
Hey there, Andrew.
And also in the studio today, we're honored to have with us Special Agent in Charge, Eugene Kowel of the Omaha office of the FBI. So before we let Gene introduce himself, I'd like to say thank you and welcome back to our past listeners. We really love hearing your feedback, and we love hearing that folks are getting a lot out of our episodes and knowing that we're talking about really everything that involves sustainability that surrounds animal agriculture. And drilling a little bit deeper down, this is for our new visitors. Thank you for joining us. Drilling a little bit deeper into sustainability, at SETU, we kind of see sustainability as a three-legged stool. Of course, it could be much more than that. So number one would be maybe what people think of first when it comes to sustainability, and that is protecting our air and our water, within the realm of animal agriculture. Everybody wants and needs clean air and clean water. The second part is doing more with less. Efficiency with resources is a huge part of sustainability. And the last leg on the stool, which might be the most applicable to today's episode, is, well, we need to have strong businesses and a strong agricultural community to support our agricultural enterprises. And so for that reason, we are absolutely thrilled to have with us Special Agent in Charge Kowel, because Special Agent in Charge Kowel and the FBI, they are responsible for protecting the herd. And so we really appreciate having you on today, Gene. And please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Andrew, Brock, great to be here. Thank you for making the time.
So Gene, could you just give us a little bit of background as far as how you got involved with the FBI?
Sure. Well, for me personally, I went to college, I went to law school, I started work as a prosecutor, and it was a job I loved. It was a very meaningful job, but I felt an inkling to be on the other side. I wanted to help build bigger cases, sort of be one of the people who, when there's an emergency, I run to the emergency and help resolve it. So I heard about the FBI. I applied. They said, come do some push-ups. I did some push-ups. And, sometime later, I was at Quantico, Virginia, going through our training program. And it's been an amazing career since then. I've been in the Bureau for about 20 years and have had some terrific assignments working with amazing partners, really doing great work, I think, of protecting the American people and upholding the Constitution.
That's fantastic. And I think I've heard somewhere along the line that law degrees are the most prevalent amongst special agents in charge. Is that correct?
No. But I understand why you would say that. I think if you go back to perhaps 1980, maybe 1990, we drew a significant number of people with law backgrounds, accounting backgrounds, military service, prior police service, and we still like all those. But now I would say we're also looking for people with cyber knowledge and technical expertise in a variety of different arenas, language skills. So we do have plenty of agents who have a background as attorneys, but it nowhere is, I think, near as prevalent as perhaps it used to be.
I understand. Excellent.
Well, that is outstanding. And, Gene, I imagine you're usually the one doing the interrogating, but I think the tables are going to turn a little bit today. And Andrew and I will be interrogating the FBI on agricultural topics, if that sounds good.
Yes. Who's going to be good cop? Who's bad cop? Just so I know before we get started.
To be determined. Stay tuned to find out, right?
By the way, I'm just saying, I saw Brock jaywalk one time in Lincoln, so,
Don't tell him that. So, well, it's just great to have you here, and thanks for sharing some of your background. And, on a similar topic, would you be able to help us understand the structure of the FBI with respect to locations? I know you're based in the Omaha Field Office, as well as the organizational structure of who handles different types of cases.
A great question. So we have 55 field offices, anywhere from Omaha, Denver, New York, Detroit, LA, sort of name some of the major cities in the U.S. And then we have hundreds of what we call regional offices, resident agencies. So as an example, from here in Omaha, we're responsible for all FBI investigations across Iowa and Nebraska. And then we have other offices throughout. So for any local listeners, we have offices in Lincoln, Grand Island, North Platte, and then 5 in Iowa, Sioux City, Quad Cities, Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, and Waterloo. And that's sort of how we're structured. We also actually have, which people don't always know, and I don't know that I knew when I joined, we have a pretty robust overseas footprint. So we have offices in about 70 countries. And even, so I joined the Bureau to, fight public corruption or gang violence or drug trafficking here in the U.S. And I found myself traveling all over the world to Iraq and Afghanistan and Belgium and Spain and El Salvador. And I think that's because the Bureau realized a long time ago that if we're going to fight cybercrime, if we're going to catch fugitives, if we're going to go after child predators, we can't just sort of wait for them to come to our borders. We have to have a forward-leaning presence. And then, of course, we have a robust headquarters presence. And a lot of what they do at headquarters is provide support to the field and then really manage particular programs, whether it's criminal, whether it's counterterrorism, whether it's counterintelligence or weapons of mass destruction, really bring some kind of focused expertise. But all the investigations in the Bureau are conducted sort of out of our field offices.
And being in Omaha, or maybe another way to ask this is, do different field offices have different emphasis just based on where they are? In other words, does the Omaha office have a larger presence in agriculture or more specialists as it relates to agriculture?
Yeah, we do. What every field office does in the FBI is every year or two, we kind of go through all the threats in our area. We look at intelligence, we look at sort of where we've been, what we know about, what we see coming over the horizon, and kind of allocate resources appropriately. So we'll say, what's the terrorism threat looking like here? What's the gang threat? What's the crimes against children? What's the fraud threat? What's the cyber threat? And we'll kind of allocate resources. So one thing I saw, I've been here in Omaha for about 5 years. And what I saw pretty quickly is one thing we do really well here in Iowa and Nebraska is we grow things, right? Food, feed, biofuel. It's what we do really well. We supply not just our country, but the world. And we also, so with that, we see a lot of risk. So we might focus more on this program. And we've tried actually to establish ourselves as a leader in this arena, because for us, our two states, this is a major economic issue, a major national security issue. And for us, agricultural security is sort of national security. And perhaps like our New York City field office might not focus on agriculture as much, right? They might focus on perhaps more on the financial industry. We all focus on everything, but we've decided here to emphasize bringing awareness to the threats, the criminal, the cyber, the terrorism, the national security threats to the ag sector.
Excellent.
Gene, you may have touched on this a little bit already, but would you be able to go a little deeper into why does the agriculture industry matter to the FBI?
Yeah, great question. So I'd say this, like wherever in the U.S. you might live, from California to Nebraska to Georgia, we've seen that the cyber threat, the national security threat to our businesses, our farms, our ranches, our food processing facilities, is growing exponentially. And the way we look at this is there are 16 segments of critical infrastructure in our country that are deemed so vital to the U.S. that their incapacitation or their destruction would have a real debilitating effect on our national security, on our economic security, and on public health. And I think we can all agree, right? Food and agriculture hits all three. I think you could argue there's few components of our nation's critical infrastructure more important, really, than our nation's supply of food and feed and biofuel. So, we see these threats constantly evolving and growing. The threat environment is more severe than it has been in years past. And so we here in the FBI are really laser focused on doing everything we can to help protect the ag sector from a national security and economic security perspective.
Sure.
Yeah, that's really cool because, the cyber threat just has to be huge because, when you talk to crop farmers these days, they're not just, say, loading up a tanker of spray material and going across a field and spraying for weeds. They're communicating with the cloud where they are with respect to the field, and they're identifying weeds by color and shape and texture, and they're spraying, just spray in the right place. And on the cyber side, boys, there surely is a lot to lose.
Well, Andrew, I think that's such a good point. I think we know that American farms and ranches are some of the most productive in the world, right? But just like the rest of our lives, it's become heavily reliant on technology, on precision agriculture, storing data in the cloud. And like you, I've talked to a lot of farmers and ranchers who, you think of farmers who, if they lose connectivity to their data, they won't go out and plant till they get it back, right? They need that connectivity, and we see technology monitoring everything from, moisture content in the soil to the prevalence of pathogens in our livestock. All that data stored in the cloud, could be compromised, could be stolen. So we see this, especially with agriculture, just like we had to in every other industry. We live our lives more and more in the digital realm. And because of that, a lot of opportunities for growth and productivity, also a lot of risk. And if you like, I can talk about some of the four main risks that we see.
Please do.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
I guess I should say there's four threats that we see the most, or that we're most concerned with. One of the major ones we're concerned with is, the halting of business operations on a farm or ranch or plant due to criminal ransomware attacks. These are just criminal groups looking to make a profit, shutting down segments of our critical infrastructure, trying to extort a ransom. And especially if that were to occur on a widespread scale during harvest time or planting time, it could have a lot of consequences. We've seen, a few years ago now, we saw a period where a number of grain co-ops got hit across the region, right? So you see the impact of that. Number two, we're worried about, from a nation state perspective, the theft of our data, our technology, and innovation by foreign adversaries, particularly the People's Republic of China. We've had cases in our office of people working on behalf of the government of China stealing proprietary hybrid corn technology that we in the U.S. have spent millions of dollars to develop, trying to take that back to China. We know China is trying to use their cyber capabilities to supplant the U.S., to steal our intellectual property. So we're concerned with that. Another main risk, which could have grave implications for our national security, is, the risk posed by adversaries like the People's Republic of China implanting malware on our systems, on our industrial control systems, on our combines, on our tractors, on our center pivot irrigation systems, and having the ability to shut down our operations in time of conflict. You've read about other malware, the Volt Typhoon takedown we did about a year ago, the Salt Typhoon takedown. These were cyber takedowns where we saw that the Chinese government had embedded malware in our telecommunications sector, in our energy, water, transportation grid. And they're not there to steal necessarily our sewage technology or our water technology. They're there so if there was a kinetic conflict between our countries, they could impose some real consequences on the American people. So something we're very concerned about. You can't buy a piece of modern farm machinery that isn't connected to the cloud.
Right.
You can't. I don't think you can do it. And so we lose a bit of control over that. And an adversary has the ability to really go in there and take advantage of it. And then the fourth threat we worry about is just the bioterrorism, biowarfare threat. Introducing pathogens into our herds, into our livestock, introducing some kind of fungus or weed into our crops that could take out a large scale of our production.
Yeah, what's interesting is of these four threats, the most common theme is cyber. It's mostly computer. It's mostly electronic based.
Mm-hmm.
In farming and agriculture, it's not unique. We see a lot of industries that 30 years ago, 40 years ago didn't need, they didn't rely too heavily on cyber, and they were able to operate. And now we see they'd be shut down. You see this often even with a school district, right? Where a school district will get hit by a cyber attack and be shut down for a little while. And you might think, well, why is that true? Like, why can't you teach? But if you can't control door access, you can't control bus schedules, you can't control the meals, you can't keep track of the students, like all these things you kind of need to ensure the safety of everyone, then you really can't go forward with teaching. And so we see that with farming. We've farmed for thousands of years without technology, but now we have gotten to a point that if we were suddenly to lose it, it wouldn't be so easy just to continue that next day.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I always think about all the different aspects of agriculture that are affected by cyber threats. It's literally on the production side with GPS on tractors and trucks and other equipment. But I think about the financial aspect of it too. Anytime I go and meet with a cattle feeder we work with, the manager's at his desk and he's watching the markets. He's buying futures positions. They're hedging against market risk. Just the whole operation comes to a halt. Even if the tractors are still going, what if they can't access the markets or their online banking? And an operation could lose millions of dollars in a day as a result of that. As the market, changes by the minute, the implications are endless when you really think about it. And
I think it's true. And I also think, which we all know, and your listeners know, that with the individual producers, don't have the same tech resources that a big company has. Like I'll go meet with, Fortune 500 companies on the cyber threat too, and they're very concerned. We work very closely with them. But I also know they have a really good team focused on it. But does a grain co-op, in Raymond, Nebraska, have a great cybersecurity team? Can they afford that? They probably can't, right? Can an individual farmer rancher afford a great, robust cybersecurity team? Probably not. And so that's why we're working extra hard to sort of spread the message of how people can protect themselves and what the threat might be.
Sure. Well, you made a statement a little while ago, Gene, that sticks with me right now, and that is agricultural security is national security. That might be the tagline of this episode, Andrew.
Absolutely.
I mean,
I wrote it
that's
down
so
as well,
true.
Brian.
We both wrote it down. I mean, that I just think that's the statement of the day or the week right here. Something that we don't always think about, but it rings true day in and day out. And I'm so glad the FBI and you and your team are working to ensure that the agriculture industry is secure. And a question I have to follow up to that is how does the FBI work to both prevent and respond to ag threats? Because I imagine sometimes, say there's a cyber attack, you need to respond to it and get that resolved. But how do you also work, to hopefully prevent these things or help the industry to be prepared for when emergencies do happen?
Sure. So I'd say two things. I'll work my way backwards. One, if your farm or your ranch, your co-op or your facility or your feedlot experiences a kind of cyber breach or cyber incident, we encourage you to call us pretty quickly, because while it might be brand new to you, it's probably been brand new to us. So we maybe have seen those hackers before, we've seen that malware before. So we can quickly engage. We're spread out across the entire country. We can quickly engage with you. We can help blunt the attack. If you choose to pay a ransom, we can sometimes help claw that money back or give you information about whether or not you need to pay the ransom. Perhaps there is a decryption key we already have that we could give you. Maybe you send some money, but we can have the ability to block money transfers. So, and at the very least, what we want to do is impose risk and consequences on our cyber adversary so it doesn't happen to other people. And we can't do that unless people call us. And when they call us, we don't arrive with 10 blacked out Suburbans. We're there because that person's a victim or that farm's a victim. So we're going to do whatever we can to help you get back into business and then also go after the adversary, deprive them of their ability to operate, whether that means we're indicting them and extraditing them back to the U.S. To face prison here, whether we're taking their money or their servers. So we encourage everyone to have, a cyber defense plan and have the FBI be part of that plan. The other thing that we're doing is on the front side, before an attack occurs, is prevention and education. So one thing we've started doing here with the FBI in Nebraska, we've been hosting, I'd say, a regional and national conference every summer on threats to the ag sector. Last summer, we had over 400 people here in Omaha from over 30 states, focusing on some of these threats that we've been talking about and bringing together producers, manufacturers, people from the academic circles, people from national security and law enforcement to really talk about how we can work together. But it really comes down to that we encourage everyone, every farmer, every rancher out there to have, a cyber defense plan and have the FBI be part of that plan.
That's excellent. And so that's really great in terms of outreach, and that, I love hearing this, that the FBI is taking a proactive approach to protecting agriculture. And we're familiar with the fact that, you personally have been to a feed yard, or you have been to feed yards, correct?
Yeah, just out at Black Shirt Feeders not too long ago, which is, I think, eventually going to be one of the biggest feedlots in North America. So I try to get out there and really talk to the people online to see, what are the threats from their perspective? What is critical to their operations? What is the risk? What could really happen that could really put them out of business for a while and pose, harm on their livestock, really interrupt the supply chain? We in the FBI don't pretend to have that kind of knowledge, but what we can do is talk to people who do and establish that partnership. One thing which gives us, the U.S., a leg up in this, I think, is because of those voluntary partnerships. You go to other countries like China, there the government can compel anyone to share any information with the government. The government can say, hey, a company of a certain size, you have to have a member of the Communist Party in your C-suite. In the U.S., we don't do that. If we don't have, while we may sometimes use search warrants or subpoenas, other lawful process, mostly we rely on partnership. We rely on people wanting to share information with us, wanting to work together with us. most of the critical infrastructure in our country lies in private hands. And the ag side, but you even think of banking and telecommunications and energy. A lot of this is privately owned. And we can only protect it if we have strong partnerships with the private sector. And so it's something we focus a lot on in the FBI.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that really makes sense, and it's making me think about another question I have. So you've talked about foreign adversaries, cyber attacks, a lot of these threats, maybe coming, you could say, from the outside. What about threats from within the ag industry or within the U.S.? And where I'm going with this is, I follow ag news. I've seen some headlines in the last few years of where there may have been someone who fraudulently claimed to own a lot of cattle, and they actually didn't. And, the bank had lent millions of dollars to, say, somebody for these cattle that actually didn't exist as collateral, even though the bank thought they did. Or you'll hear of people getting in trouble over some, hedging schemes with crops or livestock, you name it. So does the FBI work on those types of domestic rather than maybe foreign threats as well to maybe clear out some of the bad actors from within the industry?
Of course, our main priorities in the FBI are crushing violent crime, defending the homeland, and within there we're always very focused on financial crimes and the damage they can do to our country. So whether it's embezzlement, whether it's theft, whether it's we still work cargo theft, right? So we work all of those crimes. I mean, if you were to walk around our office or any FBI office, you would be hard pressed to know who's an FBI agent, who's with the local police department or sheriff's department, who's with the state patrol. Everything we do is in a task force setting. So whether we're focused on criminal threats to agriculture or cyber or national security, we'll cover the whole range. But on that point that you brought up, it's the same thing. Even if it's not an overseas adversary, if you've been the victim of a fraud or you've wired money to someone in a fraudulent way or been taken advantage of, we encourage you to call the FBI. And the quicker you call us, the better success we can have in trying to get you your money back. And also trying to identify who did it and hold them accountable. So, whether it's international actors or people right down the street from you who are defrauding you or committed some kind of crime, we encourage you to reach out to the FBI.
Yeah. So coming back to your comment that we're so fond of, that ag security is national security. I want to take that a step farther in that we look at agriculture as being so important to all aspects of life. Because agriculture weaves into food, fuel, and water. All these things are tied together, and we need these things to exist on a daily basis. And I was really encouraged when you started talking about the things that are on your radar. You mentioned biofuels, and I think something oftentimes that folks forget is how much of our fuel does come from ethanol. And as we look ahead to as we continue to go to the greening of our fuel supplies, we've got anaerobic digestion systems and things like that on farms where we have to keep animal agriculture operating, because in order to, say, produce methane or natural gas from manure, well, we have to have these farms and feedlots healthy and populated. You could imagine the horror of, say, foot and mouth disease, right? And how something like that could just really, really, besides devastate an industry from the standpoint of loss of revenue of selling a commodity, but also has the impact of affecting biofuel production.
I think I've been on a feedlot outside McCook here in Nebraska that they're able to generate from the manure like power for the entire facility, and in fact excess power that they're shipping off for other industries to use. It's really an amazing development.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd like to zoom out a little bit, and you've mentioned several times, Gene, that if someone identifies a threat, give us a call. Call the FBI in Omaha. Let's get on top of this before things could maybe get worse. I'd just like to give you an opportunity here. What would you like the general public to know, and I would say the ag industry specifically in Nebraska, Iowa, and beyond, what would you like them to know about the FBI?
I guess what I'd like them to know is that we're local. Like, we're right here in your community. You're able to respond pretty quickly to your community to help with any kind of problem. And that a lot of the work we do, which people may not be aware of, is actually supporting state and local law enforcement. So it's very common that there might be a sheriff's department or police department out here in Nebraska or Iowa, maybe a small one in a rural area, and they have a significant crime that occurs. There's an active shooter, and they just need help. And we often will come in and help. There's no federal case. We're just there to help. But I guess the number one thing is that we are ready to respond. So if you have an issue, whether it's a violent crime issue, a counterterrorism issue, a cyber issue, if you call the FBI, like you're calling people, you're calling agents and analysts and professional staff who are local. They're somewhere near where you live, and they're ready to respond.
That's really great to know, and I imagine our listeners are glad to hear that as well. As a citizen, as a taxpayer, all of the above, that just puts a smile on my face to hear that the FBI is here to help and protect the American people.
Yep.
For the Nebraska listeners, I know you're in Nebraska. I don't know if everyone knows, we have agents sitting and working and living out in North Platte, out in Grand Island, right? We're out here throughout the state, that if they need something from the FBI, there's a threat or a federal crime, like there are people there ready to respond who live in the community, who care about the community. I want to do everything they can to help protect the people of that community.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, continuing on the theme of our three-legged stool of sustainability, and that what we'll call the third leg, that is the strong businesses, and because we have to have strong businesses in order to people keep doing what they're doing. One of the things that Brock and I talk about, actually we talked about in our last episode, is developing people for agriculture, people to be working in agriculture. But just to look at it, taking a little bit of a different twist on it, you described to us your path to get to where you are, special agent in charge. If we have listeners that say this is really interesting, this was a potential way to meld law enforcement and agriculture, or law enforcement and so many topics together, how would you advise someone who might be interested in the FBI as far as going down that road?
Sure. I would say, go to our website, go to www.fbi.gov, and you'll see links to what we do. If you go to our website, FBIjobs.gov, you can read about the different areas we hire. Only about a third of our employees are agents. So being an agent isn't the only track. But a third of us are agents. Third of us, people in my office, are intelligence professionals. Their job is to look out, find the threat over the horizon, or on a case we're working, help us identify more targets, better ways we can mitigate the threat. And then the professional staff we have that that support the organization. So in our office here, we have auto mechanics who take care of our cars. We have forensic specialists who examine the cell phones we might retrieve after a search warrant. We have HR specialists. So there's so many different opportunities to join the FBI. If people are looking for a job where they get to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution and kind of come to work with a real sense of purpose in those two things, there's plenty of opportunities. I encourage them to look at our website or reach out to their local FBI office.
Excellent.
That's great. Well, with that, Andrew, I can't think of any more questions. I think we've covered the bases here. Would you agree?
Well, I do. Unless Special Agent in Charge Kowel would like to interview or interrogate you and me, Brock, is there anything?
I agree. I'm open to interrogation if he so chooses.
Yeah. If there's anything
else to say,
what questions would you have for us?
As some guys in ag.
Well, the questions I would have for you are, we are trying our best to really reach out to the community in every way we can. And if you ever think there are ways that the FBI can have better outreach with different components of the ag sector, whether on the production side or the processing side, please, we welcome that information. We'll go talk to any group. We'll get in front of almost any audience that we think can benefit from our message of how they can protect themselves from whether it's criminal threats, national security threats, terrorism threats, cyber threats, whatever it is. So that's the only question I'd have. If you think there's better ways we can get out there and give people the information they might need to help protect themselves and help, preserve national security, we're happy to hear it.
Yeah, well, we will definitely keep that in mind. And I will say, we're really impressed by the fact that you've actually been on a feedlot, and that's a big deal.
That is.
No, listen, I'm a huge supporter of Nebraska and Iowa's and our country's agricultural industry, and excited to support it. And it's also just fun for me to learn more about it. I mean, there's nothing I love more than getting out and talking to people actually doing the work, and hearing about how they might see some of these threats and what their limitations are, and to see what's critical to them, and then how we, from the FBI's perspective, can help work with them to protect it.
Excellent.
Sure, that makes sense. And I just might add a note to all of our listeners, especially those who may be producers, processors, those working directly in the ag industry. You heard Gene's question there of how can the FBI better reach out and engage with the community? Get a hold of us. Get a hold of Andrew and I if you're a feedlot producer, for example, who has a thought on that, and we can pass that along or try to get you in contact. So appreciate you asking that question, Gene. And with that, I think we've covered it. Would like to thank all of you, our listeners, both our faithful returning listeners and our new listeners who we're so excited to always have with us. And we look forward to being back with you again in a couple of weeks with an exciting new episode.
And happy Independence Day.
Yes, happy 4th of July, happy Independence Day. That'll be passed by the time you're listening. This comes out on July 9th, I believe. But yes, happy Independence Day. Excited to celebrate that. So thanks again to all of you for joining the herd today. We'll talk to you again soon.